Welcome to the Leading Business Agility webinar. Quick introduction, I'm Tom Perry. I'm an Agile transformation consultant and coach here in the Seattle area. I have a company, Thomas L. Perry LLC, and I am the author of the Little Book of Impediments and the founder of Agile Management Northwest, as well as the father of two lovely young daughters, and sailor and weightlifter and all-around great guy. Our agenda for today is going to be to talk about what is business agility, what we know so far about business agility, and the case for the emotional intelligence required to make business agility happen. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the definition of business agility. Business agility is the ability of an organization to sense changes internally or externally and respond accordingly in order to deliver value to its customers. So why do we need agile leadership in this particular context? Well, we live in what's been referred to by some as a VUCA world. VUCA being an acronym that stands for a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. This was a term that was originally coined in the military to describe a lot of the challenges that the military faces. And I think in today's day and age, it's more and more representative of what we all face in our current very complex business environments. Now, when you look at our business environment, product development for a long time has been fairly straightforward in that we could and well understood. We knew that there were certain behaviors or patterns in the marketplace. When new products came on, sales would gradually grow over time in what could generally be seen as a bell-shaped curve. And early on, you would have an early majority that you might try and sell to. And then as your product gained more and more traction, you might be selling to the late majority. And then at some point, the laggards would come on board, and then the market would gradually be diminishing, at which point you would probably be moving on and seeking your next interesting market. However, the curve that we see today is much more different. It's much more like a shark's fin, and it'll come on very deceptively, where you'll see a product being released to market, and it may fail. And it could be a series of product failures going to market, and that can lull one into a false sense of complacency that the market is not really ready yet. And then all of a sudden, boom, the market hits, and it's a tidal wave. And it can wipe out existing businesses. And we've seen that those little bumps in terms of services that are being tested in the market. And generally, that's what the little bumps are telling us early on, is that people are testing out the market, and as soon as they've figured out what to do, they will launch their major release, and at which point you're in trouble. And you've seen this before with the release of early on in the late 90s of the palm top devices, the Blackberries and the other devices that were all being experimented with in some way or another, some being mildly successful. And then along came the iPhone and wiped everyone out. And for a short while there, the iPhone was the predominant palm top device out there. That's changed since then as Samsung and other imitators have come along, but the original wave was very much the kind of thing where you saw these. Apple had the Newton, for example, and the Newton was a great little device, but it was ultimately a failure, and that would have been one of our little early blips where Apple was learning about the market. And then you saw other devices like that, like the BlackBerry and others, that were modestly successful, but ultimately failed. And then the big ones that came along were the iPhones. This market, too, has its own adoption patterns. And what you typically see is what's described as the singularity, which is early on, you will see that these little players will start to work their way into the market and experimenting with various and sundry technologies and devices. And then you get the big bang, which is when somebody finally figures out the right combination, and it is launched and adopted almost universally, almost immediately. And that actually can be very painful even for the winners, because of that steep curve. Having all of the resources necessary to support all of that can be a huge challenge. And then there's the big crunch, which is it peaks and then it falls off just as rapidly as it came on. And so for those who were not the winners in the market, and even the winners, you have to be looking at the big crunch coming afterwards, and then the entropy, which is a very small tail at the very end, where you'll have the few last folks coming on, but at that point the market's pretty much dead. So this disrupted adoption curve is very, very different from our traditional bell-shaped adoption curve. And this is becoming more and more predominant. You'll see this with things like Uber, for example, which wiped out the taxi industry. You see it with a lot of the new gig economy services, all of which are cheap and easy and set up in a fashion where they were adopted with remarkable speed. So it's all about becoming adaptive at this point. If we're going to introduce business agility, as leaders, we're going to have to focus on making our organizations as adaptive as possible. And one of the things that I'd like to do is remember Ashby's Law, which is variety of challenge must be met with equal variety in response. And that is to say, if a system is to be stable, the number of states of its control mechanism must be greater than or equal to the number of states in the system being controlled. And this is known as the first law of cybernetics. And the idea here is if your organization has a variety of competitive inputs, a variety of competitive threats, then if you are able to respond with an equal variety of decisions or products of your own, then you can cover those threats. But if you're not able to respond to a certain percentage, be it 10%, 20%, 50%, then those competitors will take advantage of you, and you will lose the race because ultimately they will overwhelm you. And so it's important that your organization be able to respond to the increasing number of inputs. So if you stay above the line and keep the number of stimuli, the variety of responses that is, equal to the number of stimuli, then you're keeping up. However, if you're not able to keep up, then it's very likely your organization is going to die. So when it comes to business agility, we need to be looking at it at multiple levels. And perhaps the first level that most folks approach it at is at the team level. This is very common within Agile organizations. And so organizations will start with teams first. And that's great, but it's just the beginning and it's not close to enough. So what we find out is that we'll implement agility within the IT department by itself, but it doesn't go outside of that department. And so other parts of the organization do not behave in agile ways. And so as a result, the organization as a whole, externally speaking, looks no different from when you started. However, if you're able to get leadership on board and leadership is changing the way they work, then they can have the kind of influence necessary to start changing the organization and the way it responds. And so in order to get to this idea of organizational agility, the first thing you have to do is establish leadership agility. If you can establish leadership agility, then the team agility that you put in place can be much more effective, and the overall organization as a whole can start to sense and respond in a meaningful way. And so the point of this slide is that in order to get to business agility, you must have that leadership agility first. And that is the focus of this presentation. So the organization needs to be able to probe and sense and respond to the markets, and it needs to be able to reconfigure itself, sometimes dramatically, to adapt to a new environment, a la Ashby's Law. and it must be able to learn faster than the competition. That's what an agile organization looks like. That's what we're after. But we can't get to that point unless we have team agility. And the teams must be able to sense change in customers and technology, reconfigure themselves, which is very hard for even agile teams to do, and they must work together with other teams collectively and towards a greater goal, which again is something that doesn't come naturally but requires explicit work and guidance on the part of leadership, which brings us to leadership. None of this happens without good leadership. And so leaders must have the empathy to sense and respond to changes in the markets and the organization. They must be able to adapt. They need to be able to share leadership and responsibility gracefully, and they must be able to help others learn fast. Now, there's a model for all of this, and this is provided by the Business Agility Institute, and I think it's a nice way of looking at things. When we look at this model, the first thing you see is the customer at the center, of course, and surrounding that, you have your typical entities of the board and the partners and your workforce. And those are the people most essential to making everything work. And then surrounding all of that, sort of in a supporting role, you have operations, leadership, and individuals. And so the operations provides the structural agility, the process agility, the enterprise agility. Leadership focuses on people management, operating as a coherent team, and building good strategic agility. And then the individuals we need to be supporting by instilling a growth mindset, providing ownership and accountability, and craftsmanship. These are the fundamental elements of organizational agility. These are the items we want to see in play when we talk about agility for entire organizations. So we're trying to create the right kind of environment for agility to grow. It needs to be the kind of thing that creates an innovative culture, a nurturing collaborative environment, the ability to continuously adapt. We're creating organizational learning and sense making and continuous engagement. So it's going to require a special kind of leader to do that. It's not easy. If we apply too much power, then innovation becomes very tricky. Innovation can fail to take root if we use too much coercion and too little shared intent, and nothing starts at all. So, as a leader, this is a very, very tricky game to play. And your leadership style will need to change and vary as you work your way through it. The underlying issue here is that this is setting up for what I would describe as a continuous transformation. It's not just a transformation, it's a transformation that's not going to end anytime soon. This is a big deal, this is a big commitment, and this is big work for everyone involved. So let's move on to what we know about business agility. As a leader, we know that the change has to start with us. The leaders go first. They need to stop talking and listen more. And the cultural change is not something you can delegate. And culture is the first thing we're going after. These are all items that came from Michael Sahota, and I like the way he approaches this. Leadership is kind of a weird thing to talk about. And in my opinion, it's something that I might refer to as spiky. I got this idea from Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall in their book, 9 Lies About Work. And the idea here is that there are all sorts of qualities people will ascribe as essential for leadership. But the fact of the matter is, there is no one person who has all of those things. Leadership, in fact, is much better described as being kind of a spiky thing. It's kind of, you'll have strengths in given areas, but you won't be perfect in all of them. And so I use this diagram of leadership attributes to kind of give you a feeling for what it might look like for a leader. They're not going to be equally a visionary and a great communicator and perfectly sociable and conscientious and rational all at the same time. But instead, they'll have certain strengths in certain areas. They won't be the most ethical, they won't be the most caring, or perhaps the most personable, but they'll have the kind of strengths that will provide good leadership, that will provide the kind of thing that we will respond to when we're working within their organization. When I think about that leadership, it also has to fit within their culture. And so I use the Snyder culture model here to describe the kinds of cultures that are out there, namely control, competence, cultivation, and collaboration. And so, whatever leadership you have has to fit within that culture. So, we can actually sort of overlay our spiky model of leadership on top of this and say that certain kinds of leadership are going to be a good fit. A certain kind of spikiness is going to be most appropriate for certain organizations and less so for other organizations. And so, if you are the kind of leader who is in a command and control organization, then your ability to deliver messages and communicate effectively in a certain way are going to be much more important than in other organizations that might be more cultivation oriented. Another tool that you might use in terms of starting to understand where you are as a leader and where you're going in terms of agility is to use the personal agility canvas. Personal Agility Canvas was developed by Dave Pryor. And I love this because it does a good job of helping us characterize where our weaknesses are, where we want to focus, and what our value proposition is, or where we are particularly spiky as leaders, what our desired changes are, what our fears and concerns are, what our goals are, what our actions are. So, this is a very helpful canvas to be used on an individual level. Of course, when you look at it, we've got folks oftentimes in these leadership positions who we need to be in a growth mindset. And this is really difficult. For some folks, they're in a fixed mindset. And so this table here does a good job of sort of characterizing the different kinds of mindsets and the difference between them. We want people to move towards that growth mindset because this is going to require them to get into areas and domains they may not be comfortable with. When we are leading with agility, we're going to be doing things like leading with empathy, and we're going to be doing a lot more listening. And we're going to be trying to respond to emotional needs and other soft skills, which are going to require some work. Oftentimes, you talk to many executives, they're under threat, they're under pressure, and that pushes them much more towards a fixed mindset, which is these are the things I can do. I don't know about this other stuff, but I'm going to stick with this. We need people to move towards that learning mindset because they're embarking not only themselves, but their entire organization on a journey of discovery when they are starting to work towards business agility. And so we need that growth mindset. The mental models need to change as well. For example, mechanistic corporate models are very common. The sort of assembly line, we just pump out widgets mentality. And that doesn't fit well within a business agility context. Strategic models need to change. We need to move from project based funding to product based funding. We need to change our performance models. Getting rid of stack ranking would be a great start. And looking at different ways of changing compensation from individual, perhaps to team compensation. And so these are all very profound changes to the way people think about how they work together and what it means to work together. Also, when we're looking at this leadership team, they're under a lot of time pressure. These are people who are in meetings all the time. We need to be thinking about how they should be spending their time differently as leaders. So, if this was taken from a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, and what they found was before an agile transformation and after an agile transformation, um, leaders spent their time much, much differently. Before an agile transformation, they spent about 10% of their time working on strategy. Afterwards, about 40% of their time. Also, prior to a transformation, the executives spent about 60% of their time on operations management and about 25% of their time afterwards. And talent management, by and large, did not change substantially. So, looking at all of that, as we move to Agile, we want our executives to be changing the way they spend their time. And they can use tools like personal Kanban to help manage that time. And I think this is a very powerful tool that people are not very familiar with. And so this is something we can give to our executives to help them understand not only where they're spending their time, but also to start the conversation about WIP limits and how much work they can get accomplished, which oftentimes is far from reality. And then as it comes to talking about Agile values, we can use a model. And you could use the Agile Manifesto. That is certainly one model. You could also use Alistair Coburn's The Heart of Agile, which is another set of Agile values. You could use a number of other models, but you need to have some values model in mind when you're thinking about your destination for your Agile transformation. So that's the case for what our leaders need to do. They need to have, of course, emotional intelligence. That is to be self-aware, able to self-regulate, motivate, have empathy, and good social skills. So if we're going to do that, here are some techniques you can use to try to enhance emotional intelligence. And these are just ideas. There's nothing magical about these things, but these are different ways of trying to focus on improving emotional intelligence. Of course, one of the things that we have to acknowledge, and I got this metaphor from Dan and Chip Heath in their book Stick, was the rhino and the rider. And when you start to think about a model for how people operate. People like to think that yes, we operate from a place of rationality where we make decisions, and those decisions are well thought out and well reasoned. But what Dan and Chip Heath point out is that actually humans don't operate that way. They operate from two different places. One is the rational, ratiocinative portion of the brain, which is making conscious decisions, but that's relatively small. That's the rider in this situation. The other way we make decisions is by the way we feel. And people don't like to acknowledge that, but the limbic system is responsible for an awful lot of influence when it comes to our primitive drives. And so, for example, if you're on a diet and you happen to walk past the buffet line, guess what? The rhino is going to go over and munch at the buffet. So we need to account for both kinds of drive. The intellectual drive, which by and large can steer the rhino just fine, unless there is an overwhelming emotional drive, at which point the intellect gets overridden. With this in mind, we might apply immediate moment theory, which is a theory to describe how emotion is transmitted. And the different appetites involved. And so, again, we're talking about the intellectual brain-based system and the body or the enteric nervous system with our hungers and our appetites. And the body and mind is the combined pipe through which emotion flows. And so we need to create a situation that appeals to both the mind and the emotions when we are trying to get consensus within an organization and create motivation. The other thing that we can use as a tool here is Daniel Pink's notion of, from Drive, of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And that's very useful in terms of trying to understand what we need to satisfy, what elements need to be present in order for people to be emotionally fulfilled. There are also, if you want to use a different model, this one comes from Paul Herr, you can use social appetites, cooperation, skill mastery, skill deployment, innovation, self-protection. It's almost a Maslow's hierarchy of needs there. But Her's model of social appetites is another way of saying, what do we need to have in place in order for people to be fulfilled? And this gives us a bit of a hint. Understanding this, then we can apply these appetites to the kinds of things that we're trying to get buy-in for. If we're trying to get folks to come to big room planning, if we're trying to make it appealing to our development teams, then we need to make sure that it provides a liberal amount of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If we don't, then we're not satisfying the needs of the people in the room, and certainly not satisfying the needs of the Rhino. So we need to think about this if we're going to create the kind of motivation, the kind of compelling events and organization that people are going to attend to. So attending to people's emotional appetites is important. So that's a brief case for the kinds of things that leadership has to attend to when looking at business agility. It's complex, it's multidimensional, and there's a lot for our leaders to pay attention to.